Hey there, I'm Danny Trester from Trester Tailor in Rochester, Minnesota. This is Tailor It Yourself. In this 4-part series, I'm going to show you how to make alterations on a t-shirt. In parts 1 and 2, we narrowed the shoulders on the shirt. We took in the sides and put darts in the back. In this part 3, I'm going to show you how to shorten the sleeves and put darts in the sleeves. And in part 4, I'm going to show you how to shorten the bottom, the hem. To do this, you're going to need a couple of tools. You'll need a scissors, a thread nippers or a small scissors, some thread to match your garment, a ruler, a seam ripper or a razor blade, some wax tailor's chalk, and some pins to do your fittings. You're also going to want a sewing machine, a serger or a sewing machine that has a zigzag stitch, and an iron that can output steam. It's possible to do this process with just hand sewing, but it's not going to look as nice or hold up as well as if it would if you used a sewing machine. Welcome back to Tailor It Yourself. We are in the middle of our series on how to alter t-shirts. This is part 3 of 4. And in this one, I'm going to show you how to shorten the sleeves on a t-shirt. So yeah, this shirt is not too bad, but I like it to hit just a little bit higher up. Generally speaking, I like to shorten my sleeves to be about 5 inches from the shoulder seam, but every shirt's a little bit different. Everybody has a different preference. Some people don't want to show as much of their arms. I just find for me the proportion and at the bust, a little bit shorter helps me. It's a little bit more flattering. But yeah, you can use this technique on any length of shirt, even a long sleeved t-shirt, as long as the hem style at the edge of the sleeve is this top stitched hem. Otherwise, if you have a ribbed cuff, it's a little bit of a different process. So you can kind of just roll it up to where it works for you. This is giving me a little bit of trouble. So you can kind of see the difference there. It's not a whole lot of a change, but for me, I like to shorten that up. I've got it probably rolled up 1.5 inches shorter than the other side, so it's a significant amount. So you can either take your wax tailor's chalk and make a mark there where you want it, kind of like right there, or you can take a pin and just put it through the fabric so that when you take it off, you know where your sleeve length is, and that's pretty much all you have to do for hemming it. On this other side, one thing you want to avoid is if you go too far past here, then you get a sleeve that's kind of like this, which is a cap sleeve, which you can do. It's just a little trickier to sew that. But I'm just going to replicate the same thing on the other side. So you can kind of see it's just a little bit less emphasis on the middle, and it kind of brings the emphasis up more at the shoulder. So that's kind of how I like to fit my sleeves, but you can do whatever works for you. Okay, next we'll take this to the work table, we'll mark and cut everything out, and then we'll shorten the sleeves. All right, so we had our one sleeve fitted, and we're gonna transfer that mark to the other side and mark this up a little bit. So what we wanna do is, where we have our pin, where we want our finished length, we kind of brush the chalk there. So we're gonna take the pin out and make that a little bit more prominent of a mark so we can really see it. And then what we want to do is fold the sleeve in half along the side seam under the arm and do the same for the other side. And this might be a little bit tricky if your sleeves are real small and kind of curved like these are. They may not lay exactly flat, but we're just going to try to do our best to get them lined up. And then you want to lay them one on top of the other with the folded edge at the top. And you want to line up the shoulder seam together, and then you can see that one sleeve is a little bit longer than the other. So on this one, there's a little bit of a sleeve difference. You can see that one sleeve is about 3/8 of an inch longer than the other. So we're going to be shortening that one more. On our one that we fitted, it's about 1.5 inches, 1 5/8. I'm just going to mark that at 1 5/8. My chalk could be a little sharper. And then we're going to just keep hold of the shoulder seams over there. Then we're also going to mark this other side. So this one we're going to be shortening about 2 inches, so about 3/8 of an inch different. And then what we want to do is take the folded edge of the top of the sleeve and line it up parallel with the work surface. It's a little easier to see on here because I've got this gridded mat here, which kind of makes it a little easier to tell which direction you're going, but it's going to help us keep everything nice and straight. And what we want to do is make sure that when we're doing this, we get our ruler perpendicular to this edge. We don't want to go too far this way or too far this way, because what will happen is if we mark it at an angle, there'll be a peak in the sleeve. So when you unfold this, it'll kind of be, there'll be a peak one way or the other, and we want it to be nice and parallel so that it evenly goes all the way around. So we'll lay those together, and then what we're going to want to do, and this is a little tricky because we're going so short, it's getting really close into the arm's eye under the sleeve there in the armpit. So we're going to make this as parallel as we can without, cutting into the side seams here. So if we have to go a little longer, then that's what we're going to have to do in order to make sure that we keep this parallel here, or I should say perpendicular here, this nice and straight, and that we leave a little bit of allowance for our turning of the hem underneath. This one is about 5/8 of an inch, so I'm going to go a 1/2 inch. So we want to be at least a 1/2 inch from that seam so we have somewhere to stitch. So I'm going to mark that there just so we know we can't go past that point. So if we lay this down and go straight from that underseam, we can't go as short as we want to go. So I'm just going to make this a tad bit longer, and I'm going to put a mark through the mark that I don't want. So we'll go straight from there. If you're doing a longer sleeve or a wider sleeve, this isn't so much of an issue. It's just that we're going so short getting into that arm's eye there. But yeah, if you were marking a longer sleeve, then you would want to mark each sleeve individually when you have it on. Otherwise, if you have an arm difference and you just do them the same as one might be longer or too long or too short. So you want to make sure that if you're doing long sleeve, you mark them individually. If you're doing a short sleeve, you just want it to hang the same from the shoulder, so you can mark it the way I'm doing it here. Okay, so we'll lay our ruler down, and then we're going to take our chalk, and I'm a little bit tipped, but it'll be okay. We'll adjust for that when we're sewing. I want to try to keep the sleeves as short as I can. And then we're going to run our chalk along the ruler to make a mark, and then we'll flip the sleeve and mark with our chalk under there, and then we'll flip it again under the side there. All right, so now we've got our fold line marked, and now we want to mark the cut line. So again, this sleeve's about 5/8 for this hem width here that was there originally, but we're going to do a 1/2 inch just so it's a little easier. But you can go up to an inch. You can do, if you have enough space that you can have a straight, section. If you're going down here, you can go 1.5 inches. That's a little excessive. Usually 1 inch is the widest that you see on t-shirts and things like this. So we've got our cut mark there, and then we're going to measure down here 1/2 inch as well. And my chalk could be a little sharper, but it's all right. So we're going to mark that there, and then we're going to mark under here. All right, so now we've got our cut lines, and when you separate the two layers, if they're a little bit light, you can always run your ruler back over, make it a little darker. Okay, so if you're shortening the sleeves and not a whole lot, but your hem is wider and where you want to go, if you want to sew or cut into the old hem and take the stitching out first, then you'll need to do that. But because we're going to be folding and cutting outside of our original hem, sleeve hem, we don't have to worry about that. We can just cut that off. But you may have to take that apart depending on what you've got going on with your sleeves. Okay, so if we unfold this, we can see that we've got a nice straight line on both sides of the sleeve there. And this was our the mark that we were going to do originally, but because of the angle of the sleeve, we want to keep it straight. We couldn't go as short, so I'm just going to get rid of that mark, not to confuse ourselves. All right, so I'm just going to darken the other side. This was the underside, it's just a little too light, so I'm just going to darken that up a little bit. Okay, and now we can cut our sleeves off. So we'll grab the scissors, and following that second line, cut through there, and then the other side. All right, now we've got our sleeve excess cut off. I'll show you how to prepare the cut edges before we put our sleeves back together. All right, we're here at our serging machine, also known as an overlock stitch machine. If you haven't watched the previous videos where I kind of did a little bit of an explainer what a serger is, it is a machine that uses 3 or 4 threads to sew at the same time, so it can encase the raw or cut edges, and it can also trim the fabric at the same time. So we're going to take our shirt that is inside out, and we're going to place either sleeve underneath the machine, and we're going to be on the underside of the sleeve where the side seam is, and place that underneath the foot and line it up so that the edge of the foot, the edge of the cut fabric is at the edge of the foot. We don't want to go past that because the cutting blade that is right here will cut that off. So we'll just drop the foot down, and we will make sure we've got a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this shirt, which our foot happens on my machine to be a 1/2 inch. So I can either line up the cut edge along the edge of the foot, or I can line up my chalk mark to the edge of the presser foot. Either one's fine. The only thing is I just don't want to start leaning the fabric to the right because then it's going to trim it off. So we will go forward a little bit, and as we sew this, we kind of want to stretch this a little bit. That'll give a little bit of ease to the fabric. We don't want the stitching to tighten the fabric. We want to make sure that we have some stretch in the sleeve there. So we'll just kind of keep it laying flat, and then as we feed it into the machine, we'll pull it just a little bit. And you can see the machine will trim off little tiny scraps, but nothing major. And this is what it looks like. It's got a nice, even, consistent stitch there on the front and the back, and then they kind of loop together along the edges. And we can see that there's also a little bit of stretch in this fabric, and that's what we want. Otherwise, you know, if we didn't, it would be, you couldn't stretch it, and then eventually, you know, as you're wearing it, you would pop stitches likely. So we want to make sure we keep that flexibility in the fabric. And when I started here, I got a little bit of a roll, so I'm just going to clip this out of here so I can roll that flat. There we go. And we're coming back to our start point, so I just want to go past it a little bit, and then we'll run it off the machine. And I always cut a little bit of a tail there. So you can see we've got some stretch in the fabric yet. And it's nice and consistent all the way around. Now that we've done the one sleeve on the serger, we'll take the other sleeve over to the zigzag machine, and I'll show you how to do that next. All right, so for our one sleeve, we are going to encase the cut edge with a zigzag stitch on our sewing machine. So first thing we want to do is adjust the stitching to make sure that we have it to the correct length and width. We want to try to kind of mimic the width of the serging stitch, which is about 1/4 inch wide and about 1/8 inch in between each stitch. We don't want to go too far apart because it's not going to be effective. We also don't want to go too close together because it'll stretch out the fabric and sometimes just get stuck sewing in one spot. So we'll just practice sewing on our scrap here a little bit. And that's about what I'm looking for. I want something that's about 1/4 inch wide and about 1/8 inch in between each stitch. So I think that should work. And this may translate to a little bit smaller on your machine. On my machine, I know that I won't be able to get as wide as what my serger can do, so I will just maximize the width, and then we'll adjust the closeness to suit our needs. All right, so we'll take our sleeve, and inside out, with the outside of the sleeve facing us, we'll kind of place it on the machine, and we'll start at the side seam underneath the sleeve there. And again, we'll place the needle just off the edge of the fabric. We don't want to go totally off because it might get stuck with this single layer of knit fabric. I find it holds up a little bit better if you do it just before you get to the edge of the fabric. All right, so we'll sew forward and make sure we're doing all right. Loop my thread here. All right, and you can kind of see what we have here. We kind of want it just off the edge there. You kind of see how it's catching the edge sometimes and pulling it in a little bit. It looks a lot smaller than our scrap fabric because the knit is stretching back on it. That should work fine. All right, so we're approaching our start point, so we're just going to go past that a little bit and then back tack. All right, then we'll clip our threads. We can see how we've got that just to the edge there. And that should be enough to give it a little more durability and a solid base for the needles to stitch through when we turn up the sleeve and stitch that. And this is what it looks like compared to the zigzag stitch. You can see that the serger thread has a lot more coverage and is more consistent, but they both accomplish kind of the same thing. All right, so now we've got our raw edges encased, and we're going to take it over to our straight stitch machine and sew up our sleeves. First, we want to make sure that we have our machine adjusted properly. We want a little bit of a longer stitch to accommodate some stretch and flexion in the sleeve. So I'm sewing at about 3.5 millimeter. I don't know what that equates to on your machine, but something that's just a little bit on the longer side. And if you have a ballpoint needle, I'd highly recommend it, especially if you're using a really stretchy fabric. It'll help keep from skipping stitches and also prevent putting holes in the fabric. Some knits are kind of delicate and some finishes on it. Once you puncture it with a sharp needle, it'll leave holes behind. So if you have to take anything out and readjust anything, you might see those. So I always recommend a ballpoint needle when sewing with knits. Also, you might have been wondering, why do we go through all the trouble of encasing the raw edges with the serging and the zigzagging? If you are experiencing skipping stitches, having that extra stitching along that edge is one very small thing that will just make the surface a little bit more tension on there, so that the needle can penetrate a little easier. And if you're experiencing skipping, ballpoint needle, and then have those edges serged or zigzagged, and that'll just add a little bit more stability for sewing through there, and it'll just stitch a little bit nicer. So we're going to turn our shirt right side out, and we're going to start under the arm. Doesn't matter which sleeve you start with, and we've got our side seam here under the arm, and we're going to fold that along our chalk line, and we want the side seam lined up with the side seam. We want the side seam of the shirt lined up with the side seam on the body. Otherwise, if you get too far forward or too far backward, you can get a twist in the sleeve. So we want to make sure our starting point, that our side seam is lined up with the side seam when you fold it. And then we'll slide that under the machine so that the needle is, it got a little short on this side because the zigzagging sucked some of our hem facing in, but we want to line it up. It should be at a 1/2 inch. Right now it's at 3/8, but whatever measurement you chose, if you're doing 1 inch, 3/4, whatever, your folded edge along your chalk mark should be on your line gauge for where you want to put that, and that'll keep you nice and straight, keep you from getting a little off course. So we're going to lay this out, kind of lay it smoothly but not pull it, and we're going to want to sew just along this zigzagged edge here. And then as we get further into the shirt, our seam allowance is more accurate, so it's a 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to keep following the 1/2 inch seam allowance gauge there. And again, I don't want to get it too twisted or anything, so I'm just going to keep on following my chalk marks and my line gauge. Not moving side to side one way or the other, just trying to keep it nice and straight and smooth, feeding it through the machine. And we're approaching the point where we started, so I'm just going to run up into there, and then where my stitching was, I'm just going to cover right into there, and then back tack. And there we have our seam completed. And you can see we've got a nice even stitch line there. It's a little bit wiggly right now, but when we press that out, it's going to lay nice and flat. So you could be done and just have it as a single stitch at this point, but I want to do a second row and show you how to do a double stitch if that's a look that you want, and you want to like a little insurance if you do pop some stitches and you have 2 rows of stitching that will keep your sleeve up. And the first row we were sewing on the inside of the shirt. For the second row, we're going to do it on the outside because it's a little easier to see that see our original line of stitching, and a little easier to get that lined up. So you could either, if you have a wider hem, 1 inch or 3/4, maybe you want to do 1/4 of an inch in between the stitching. But for this one, because it's only 1/2 inch, I'm only going to do 1/8 of an inch. So for 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to take my seam, our stitch line that we already did, and put that in the middle of our presser foot here, because I know that there's 1/4 inch between where the needle is in the middle and the very edge of the left side here. So if I put that in the middle, it's going to be 1/8 of an inch. If I wanted 1/4 inch, I would line my stitch line that we already did with the edge of my presser foot. But everybody's machine is a little bit different. Your foot may look a little bit different, so just adjust to what works for you. So again, I'm going to put that in the middle of my foot here, and I'm not going to watch the needle or my line gauge or any of that. I am just going to watch my existing stitch line go into that foot and make sure it stays in the middle so that both lines stay parallel. And I'm going to go pretty slowly because I just kind of want to make sure they get lined up. And you can kind of see we've got the double needle effect there. And we're coming around the sleeve here. And I'm just going to sew right into where I started. Back tack. Clip my threads off. And there we have our sleeve sewn with a double stitch there, and we've got a little bit of flex in the sleeve. Right now it's a little bit wiggly, but we'll press that out and it'll lay nice and flat. So now let's do our other side. And again, we're going to fold up where our marks were, and it got a little bit worn off as we've been working here, so you can always go back and make your marks a little bit more prominent. And then we want to fold our side seam, fold along our side seam, flip that up so it's not twisted at 1/2 inch. And this is the serge side, so the stitching, you know, the overlock stitching is a little bit more prominent. And again, I'm just kind of rolling that and along my 1/2 inch mark along my line gauge. And I'm coming around to where I started. Back tack. Okay, so there's our first row there. First row, and then I'm going to flip it so that we're sewing on the outside of the shirt, and I'm going to put my stitch line in between, in the middle of my presser foot there, and stitch our second row. Okay, and there we have our second sleeve with our second row of stitching. That's kind of what it looks like there. And we've got our sleeve sewn up, so now we'll take it over to the pressing board and get it all nice and flat looking, and we will try it on, see what it looks like. Okay, so we're at the pressing board. Let's get this looking nice and crisp. So we'll take our iron, and using steam is important. It helps things look nice and crisp. So we're going to take the iron, and on the inside of the sleeve, just kind of go around, hit it with a little steam. Use the weight of the iron to press it flat. And then once we've done the outside, I kind of like to flip it flat and press it a little bit from the outside. All right, and now we'll do the other side. And doing this will also get rid of our chalk marks, because if we use wax tailor chalk, the heat and the steam from the iron is going to make that all disappear. All right, we've got our sleeves pressed, so let's take it back over to the fitting room, try it on, and see what it looks like. All right, guys, we're back in the fitting room. I've got my shirt on, and I think it's looking really good. I've got my sleeves a little bit shorter so that it's more, the focus is more up here, and it's just a little bit less kind of bulky up top. One thing that happens, and you might be able to notice, is that they've got this little bit of a belling out at the end. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but I didn't mention in this one. This shirt has a lot of rayon in it, and rayon is very volatile and responsive to heat and steam and pulling. So we did our serging, our zigzagging, our pressing, our stitching, all that good stuff, all on this seam here. So before I do anything else and try to correct some of this flounce in there, I'm going to take it home and wash it. Because a lot of that's going to shrink out of there. So if we decided that we wanted to take the sleeves in further under the arms or do something else, we want to make sure that we have it how it's going to be in its natural state before we make further steps. So that's why it's also very important to pre-launder any of your items before you alter them, because especially with rayon, cotton, linen, a lot of that stuff is going to shrink up. So, but as far as the length goes, I think this is looking really good, and shows off my arms a little bit. So yeah, so far in this series, 4-part series, we have narrowed the shoulders. We've taken in the sides, through the sleeves, through the hem, and also shortened the sleeves. And the next step is going to be shortening up the length a little bit. But I will show you in this little bonus round, if when you wash the shirt, you still have a little belling out, or because we changed the angle of the sleeves and we shortened them. If you're getting these little peaks here, I'm going to show you how to correct that in the next step. Welcome back to the fitting room. I've got my shirt on. I took it home and washed it so that I could double check the fit and see if I could get some of this belling to come out of the sleeve, which it did. It's laying a lot nicer, but it still has a little bit of that effect. So what we can do to counteract that is we can put in darts along the edge of the sleeve here, and that'll take some fullness out of the bottom so that it lays a little bit closer to my arm. This happens because we stretched and stitched the fabric a little bit. Also, we've changed the angle of the sleeve. The sleeves used to be more angled down, but because we've narrowed the shoulders, it kind of made the peaks go up a little bit. So if you find that this is happening to you on your shirts, you can counteract that by adding darts. And if you're not familiar with what darts are, you didn't see our video where we put them in the back. They are little seams that you create to take out wedges of fabric to provide shaping. So to do this, you kind of pinch the fabric a little bit, put a pin through there, and again, this is a little tricky to do on your own, so if you've got someone to help you, that's helpful. And it just kind of demonstrates, once that is taken out of there, how it fits closer to the arm. You don't want to do it too much because you can already see I'm starting to get a little bit of a peak here. So when I lay that down on my by my sewing machine, I think I'm going to back that off a little bit. And I'm only going to stitch to about maybe here, because I don't want to take it. It's already, you know, to my shoulder here. So I don't want to take it in, past this point here. I just want this little bit at the bottom so that it lays a little flatter to my arm. And this side will kind of be about the same. So it'll kind of look more like that. More like that. So I'll show you how to do that real quick in this little bonus round on shortening sleeves and getting them to fit a little bit more to you. Let's go. So we've got our pin in our sleeve, and when we measure that, it's about a 1/2 inch. I'm not going to go too much further than that just because we're going to be stopping in a short distance. And I also don't want to do it too severely that I end up with a peak in the side of the sleeve. So I'm just going to take my pin out because we've measured that, and I'm going to flip my sleeve inside out. And we're going to want to line up the sleeve along the edge where the shoulder seam is, because we kind of want it to be a continued. We're not going to go all the way up, we're just going to go to about the middle of the sleeve, but we kind of want to line it up so that it's along the side and a little less noticeable. So there we go there, and then we'll take our ruler and our chalk and we'll just kind of mark 1/2 inch on either side. And what I'm going to want to do is also look at our mark that we made on the inside of the sleeve where I want to stop and just transfer that mark to the inside of the shirt. There we go. So when I sew this, I'm going to want to start on the sleeve edge, and that way I can be sure that I get it nice and lined up and that my edges are nice and flush. So we've got to add a 1/2 inch roughly. And then we want to make sure we get them perfectly flat together, and then we'll put that under the machine, sink our needle, and then we're going to stitch forward and back a little bit to tack the seam. And then as soon as we're done tacking, we're going to try to taper smoothly. If we go past our mark a little bit, that's fine. We just don't want to go too severely, taper too quickly, because then you'll end up, if we went off the fabric like this, you could see how severe this angle is here. You're going to end up with a bubble on the outside of the shirt. So you want to go enough distance so that you can smoothly transition, so it's nice and smooth on the outside. And then when you get to the edge here, just back tack, and that's it. So when we flip that to the outside, we can see that our edges are real flush and that we've got our little dart there. And once we give this a press, that'll lay even flatter. But before we go on to the next sleeve, we're going to tack our sleeve seam to the back side. So this here's the back side because that's where the tag is. So we'll take that seam allowance, and if you're going to be doing this a lot, maybe more than a 1/2 inch on the fold, you're going to want to cut some of that out of there. But just because we've only done this small amount, I'm just going to leave that in there in case I want to make adjustments in the future. So I'm going to hold that to the back, and then I'm going to lay it under my machine. We did a similar thing when we tacked the sides, when we took the sides in. So we're going to stitch forward to our sleeve hem, stitching, and then go back. I'm going to go back again and off the edge. Okay, so if we look at our edge, it's nice and straight. We don't have a peak in there, and the edges are flush there. So now we'll do our other side. We didn't pin this side, but that's all right because we are going to do them the same amount. So again, we will kind of lay our sleeve so that it lines up with the shoulder seam. And we're going to mark about a 1/2 inch. And I also want to make sure that the darts are the same length on both sides. So I'm going to take my other one and lay it against my new one and see where it stops here, and then mark that on this other shirt so that the dart length on both is the same. Okay, so again, we'll make sure that our edges are flush. Put that under the machine, tack forward a little bit, go back, and then come forward again. And then we're going to slowly transition to the edge of the fabric. And when we get to the edge, back tack, and then you're done. And again, we'll tack the sleeve to the back side. So on this one, this side is the back side. That's where my label is. So we'll push the seam allowance to the back side, flip this over, make sure that it's all lined up, nice and flush at the top, and then we'll tack that down. So we'll flip the shirt right side out, and we can see that our darts are nice and even. So we'll take it over the pressing board, give it a very gentle light press just to make that lay a little flatter, and then we'll try it back on and see the effect that it has. All right, we've got the shirt back on, and you can see how the belling effect on the sleeve has been reduced. There's still a little bit of that, and part of that is because I just pressed it again after I made the darts. So when I take it again home and wash it, that should flatten out some. But if you're experiencing this belling effect, that's how you can counteract that. If you have a sleeve that's longer, or if you're doing a long sleeve, this isn't going to be an issue for you. It's just if you're doing a shorter sleeve and you've also narrowed the shoulders and you have a kind of a looser fabric, you can get that effect. So that's how you can kind of counteract that a little bit. And you can see how the darts line up with the shoulder seams here on both sides. And if you're especially wearing a darker color, you're definitely not going to see it at all, but it's kind of a minimal thing that for me I find I like to do because it makes it look a little bit nicer and not so flouncy on the sides. And that concludes part 3, where I showed you how to shorten the sleeves and do a little alterations on the width of them. Stick around for part 4, where I will show you how to hem the bottom of a t-shirt. But hope you learned something, and thanks for watching. For more information, including a recommended tools list and downloadable PDFs, you can see the video description below. Thanks for watching, and hope you subscribe.